The science of tennis. Many tennis players, myself included, believe that the game is intuitive. And while this is true to a great extent, there is much about the sport that is actually simple, basic science. In this video, I'll be looking at some of the scientific concepts behind the great game of tennis. The Magnus effect. You might wonder, what is the link between a tennis legend Bjorn Borg and a 19th century scientist Gustav Magnus? Well, other than they're both European, a lot more than you think links them. So now I'm going to explain briefly the Magnus effect. I'm going to take a tennis ball on its trajectory after being hit with topspin. The ball is moving from left to right, so the actual rotation of the ball is clockwise. If the ball is moving from left to right, then the air that is opposing it is moving from right to left. So now I'm just going to draw the first lines or the beginnings of what is going to represent the airflow in this diagram. We will consider that the air is moving at a velocity v. In order to better understand this diagram, I've drawn 8 lines that represent the opposing airflow. What's going to happen when they reach the ball? So, 4 of those lines will go from on top and 4 from under, as can be seen here. So, what's going to happen to the airflow traveling on top of the ball and to the one traveling under? When the airflow reaches the top of the ball, it will be subject to friction created by the tennis ball. Because the tennis ball is rotating in the opposite direction as the air is moving, this friction will act against the air, thus making the airflow travel at a slower velocity. So, if we had called the initial velocity v of the air, having been slowed down, it's now traveling at a speed v minus. When the airflow reaches the bottom of the ball, it will also be subject to friction created by the tennis ball. But because in this case, the tennis ball is rotating in the same direction as the air is moving, this friction will act with the air, thus giving the airflow a little kick or boost that will result in the airflow moving at a faster velocity than before the contact with the ball. We are going to call this velocity v+. So now we know that the air is traveling at a faster speed on the bottom than the top of the ball. At the top of the ball, because the air is moving at a slower speed, the pressure exerted on the ball is higher than the pressure exerted at the bottom of the ball, because down there, like we said, the air is moving at a faster speed. Finally, because the pressure on top is higher than at the bottom, a resultant force pointed towards the bottom will be created. This force is called the Magnus force, because he is the first to have discovered this concept. So, what does all of this have to do with tennis? The answer to this is very simple. Today, players are able to hit the ball much faster without the ball going out of bounds, because by putting enough topspin on the ball, the Magnus force pulls the ball down for it to bounce inside the lines of the tennis court. Topspin has revolutionized the game, as players hit forehands with an average speed of 75 miles an hour today. Bjorn Borg was one of the first players to take advantage of topspin in order to hit more powerful shots and destabilize his opponents. Tennis fans consider him a legend of the sport because he revolutionized the way tennis is played today. The evolution of the tennis racket. Since the first tennis racket was created in 1874 by Major Walter Wingfield, it has become bigger and better, in turn altering shape and shaping the game. From humble beginnings, tennis rackets today have become bigger, lighter, and more aerodynamic, allowing players to put more spin on the ball and shaping the way the game is played today. Wood. The first tennis racket was made of wood. It was long and, needless to say, heavy, limiting the amount of power players could put into their shots. The head size was 67 square inch only, limiting the amount of surface that could make contact with the ball, which is called sweet spot. While the head was made bigger over time to make playing easier, the wooden tennis racket remained unchanged for almost 100 years, except for one upgrade in 1947 when the material was changed to laminated wood, layers of wood glued together, because that process facilitated production as well as making the racket more flexible. Metal. While this may seem counterintuitive, the evolution of the tennis racket passed by a steel era. Its small head and open throat reduced air resistance, making the racket more aerodynamic and easier to swing, thus allowing the players to play more comfortably. Discovered by French tennis player René Lacoste, he was unable to mass produce it. The patent actually went to tennis giants Wilson, who in 1969 created the Wilson T2000, the racket on the right. Arguably, this was the instrument that propelled Jimmy Connors and Billie Jean King to the top of their game. In the late 1970s, aluminum replaced stainless steel as the material of choice, as it was thought to be lighter and easier to mold. It was short-lived, however, as the resulting racket was way too flexible, propelling the ball in all directions except that intended by the player. Graphite. In the early 1980s, major tennis brands were looking to find a more durable material, which was also lightweight. This is when they opted for graphite. Graphite is a gray crystalline allotropic form of carbon, most notably used in pencil heads. Graphite rackets were less flexible, allowing for optimum control. That said, with less weight to them, they were also easier to weld and therefore to produce. The only problem with the graphite tennis racket was its durability. Lasting well over 20 years, racket manufacturers are struggling to produce and sell more innovative rackets to boost sales. So, how does the surface of the court affect the game? Like we know, there are three main surfaces of tennis courts. There are the clay courts, the hard courts, and the grass courts. Even though the ball only spends on average 5 milliseconds on the ground during each shot, those 5 milliseconds can affect the angle at which the ball bounces back, as well as the speed at which the ball will emerge. The clay court. The clay court is composed of crushed stone, brick, and shale. The surface is soft and lets the ball sink into the ground, as can be seen in the diagram. By sinking into the ground, the ball loses around 40% of its velocity due to the resulting energy transfer, but also bounces back more vertically because it's propelled by the tiny ramp created. As such, the ball on a clay court has more bounce than on any other surface. So on the clay court, because the ball bounces higher and at a slower speed, rallies tend to last longer, and points and matches also last longer. Hard court. For the purposes of this presentation, we will consider the hard court as the standard court. Most often made of concrete, the ball does not sink into the surface, but does lose 30% of its velocity nonetheless. This is due to friction. The ball does not bounce as high as it does on clay, as there is no ramp formed on impact with the concrete. Upon impact with the grass, the ball bends the individual blades of glass, leaving low friction. That way the ball keeps most of its initial velocity and exits at a lower angle, leaving a much lower bounce. And this is why points on grass last shorter, because with the ball going at a faster speed and bouncing much lower, it's more difficult to return the ball. Conclusion diagram. This diagram shows how a tennis ball traveling at 100 kilometers an hour rebounds at a different angle and speed depending on the material of the court. As we can see, a ball traveling at 100 kilometers an hour on a hard court rebounds at an angle of 41 degrees and the speed of 67 kilometers an hour, whereas a ball on a clay court bounces higher yet slower at 57 kilometers an hour and at 44-degree exit angle. And a ball on a grass court rebounds the fastest, but at the smallest angle. Why do players opt more for playing cross court than playing down the line? By using Pythagoras' theorem in calculations, we realized that the players can gain up to 1.4 meters in court length by playing the ball diagonally across the court. This enables the players to hit with more power while risking less. This is why playing cross court is considered playing safe. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that it has helped you in understanding the game of tennis better and will also aid you in making you an even better player.